Be sure to watch it back on live stream, I'm sure, because today's going to be a gripping session about a topic I think that we're all very excited about. We've called it From Red Rock to Green Metals. I had proposed to Frank that it should be from hard rock to heavy metal. This is a bit cooler, but I was outvoted. But whatever you call it, it is very cool. It is certain to be the next big thing, and you'll be glad you didn't press the snooze button too many times this morning. My name is Anna Freeman. I'm a Policy Director at the Clean Energy Council, which is the peak body for the renewable energy sector in Australia. And it's my pleasure to be able to co-present this session today together with the team at ANU. Well, steel production, as I suspect we all know, is one of the most energy and emissions intensive industrial processes on the planet, representing around 8, sometimes I read 9, not quite sure, it's somewhere between those two, % of global emissions. And if it were a country, it would represent all the emissions of India and Australia combined, which is just a mind-boggling thing to think about. And with pressure mounting to develop low and zero carbon supply chains, producers and customers are in the throes of developing their long-term decarbonisation and investment strategies. What are their options? And is a larger role in the iron and steel processing supply chain Australia's next big economic opportunity? We certainly appear to have many of the essential ingredients. But what of our current iron ore customers who have large established steel manufacturing industries? China, Japan, India, Korea, are they interested in Australia playing a larger role in the supply chain? And what will it take for Australia to attract the billions of dollars of private capital in a new green iron sector in Australia? They are some of the questions that we'll be thinking about today, and we have a wonderful lineup of speakers who can provide us with real insights into where this green metals superpower, where the green metals superpower potential lies. And to get us started, I'm delighted to say that we have the reasonably newly minted Assistant Minister for Climate Change and Energy, the Honourable Josh Wilson, in the House to provide this morning's opening remarks. And as a man from Australia's very own superpower state of Western Australia, the largest iron ore supplier in the world, and it's a state of Australia in its own right, accounting for, I think, 39% of total global supply in 2023, which is just massive, followed by Brazil at 16%. So I dare say that in that vein, he has more than a passing interest in the question. Welcome, Josh.
Thanks, Anna. Good morning, everyone here and online, or good afternoon to those in other time zones. It's fantastic to be here as part of this session. Of course, COP29 is literally a kind of a tornado of fascinating and important climate and energy-related conversations, but this is a very important one for some of the reasons that Anna has identified. And I come from Western Australia, so I certainly live in the iron ore state within Australia, and a very significant, the most significant jurisdiction as far as iron ore production is concerned. I'll start by saying kaya, which is how we say g'day in the part of Western Australia that I'm from, Fremantle, or Walyalup, the lands of the Whadjuk Noongar people. And I'm really glad just to provide a couple of introductory remarks before we get to the action and hear from some experts and some people who are closely involved in this enterprise. It is vital. Why is it vital? Because steel is vital. We're going to continue to need that to address development challenges broadly, but actually to be part of the challenge in the decarbonisation and new energy and new technology transformation that's occurring. At the same time, the steel industry does represent 8.1% of total energy system emissions. So to the extent that as we go down the decarbonisation path as quickly and as substantially as we can't leave anything out. We certainly can't leave steel production out. The Australian government sees that very clearly. We need to do that for our own sake. We need to do that as a responsible global partner and regional partner. I often, when I try and give young people optimism about the transformation that we're undertaking, I like to make the point from an Australian perspective that if you go back 50 or 60 years, you'll find a point when the top 5 exports by value out of Australia were entirely different to the top 5 exports by value today. And those top 5 exports today will change again. We have to expect that coal and gas, for instance, will not be significant export earners for Australia in time to come. But iron ore will, and green metals will have to be. So there is a very significant technical and industrial challenge before us that we are at the sort of the early stages of. It starts with raising awareness of green metals within the field of decarbonisation. I think in Australia people are very focused on renewable energy deployment and storage, probably less so on some of the things in the industrial space like green metals. Green metal will not be the outcome of an Adam Bant-led Def Leppard cover band. It will be the outcome of a really complex and important industrial change that Australia wants to play a leading role in. And we're doing that with $1.7 billion of investment through our Future Made in Australia program, the Innovation Fund, a part of that program. We are doing it in the way that we support green hydrogen production, because that will be a critical input to green metal production. So the Hydrogen Head Start program in Australia and the hydrogen production tax credit. And also through the Guarantee of Origin scheme that I have responsibility for delivering, because the Guarantee of Origin scheme will be a high integrity, robust, transparent authentication mechanism for new low emission products like green hydrogen in the first instance, but before too long green metals and low carbon liquid fuels. And of course we want that certificate system, the GO or REGO scheme, to be the basis of the hydrogen production tax credit that I just mentioned. So all of those things are instances of how the Australian government is leading into this challenge. But like almost everything that we talk about here at COP29, there is no time to waste, and we can't waste any more time. We've got to get on with it. We see that clearly, and I know that the panellists today will have some important insights into the kinds of things we need to consider and the kinds of actions we need to get on with. So thanks for having me to deliver some opening remarks. I look forward to hearing the conversation.
Fabulous. Thank you, Minister. And I have to say, I think it's a real feather in the cap of this government in terms of the attention and the effort that has been made in relation to its Future Made in Australia agenda, and we are very excited about that and that actually being delivered. I know that there's a lot of work still to be done to make sure that that implementation goes smoothly, but the government has laid out a very clear vision for Australia in terms of what we could do, so we really appreciate those efforts. Now it's my pleasure to welcome our next speaker, who is Fiona Beck, who has get this, I think about the things I could have done with my life. I'm not sure I would have ended up doing this, but she has a background in applied physics and engineering. She, I imagine, spent a very long time at university, and she is now an associate professor at ANU, where she focuses on the opportunities and challenges in transitioning the global energy supply system from fossil fuels to renewable energy. She's going to speak to us today in her capacity at the HILT CRC, which is the Heavy Industry Low Carbon Technologies Cooperative Research Centre, which brings together industry and researchers to develop and demonstrate low carbon technologies that will help de-risk and accelerate the decarbonisation of steel, iron, alumina and cement industries. I think it's been a real success story since it was set up, and is doing an incredible amount of work with industry, which is very important for setting us up on this particular question. So Fiona, over to you.
Thank you very much, Anna. And yes, indeed, I am still at university. Right. I think I will dispense with those slides, otherwise you won't actually see me. So my job today is to give you a little bit of context into understanding the opportunities for Australia in green iron and steel before our wonderful panel dig in and talk about it in more detail. So Australia is the largest exporter of iron ore. So this map here highlights the top 5 importers and exporters of iron ore, and you can see Australia there with 56%, and you can see China as the largest importer. And the little graphic there demonstrates very nicely that China really is our biggest customer for iron ore, and the supply chain from Australia to China is an incredibly important one. So Australia has different types of ores. The type of an ore is determined by how much iron it has in it, as well as the impurities and other things that are contained. So we have large amounts of magnetite, which are those gray bubbles on the graph, as well as hematite. That graph shows the amount that we have relative to other people, other countries, portrayed as the content of iron, right? So you can see that even though we have a lot of magnetite, the hematite has got a lot more iron content. So therefore, shows up as a much larger amount. Whereas our magnetite is lower grade, contains less iron, but we do actually have a fair amount of it as well. This is our current steel processing supply chain. And there are 2 main processes that are used to make steel. BOF is the blast oxygen furnace, where pig iron is combined with a lot of coking coal to produce a lot of carbon dioxide and steel. And we also have the EAF, which is the electric arc furnace. So there, the pig iron is converted to steel via electricity. So about 80% of the world's steel is made via BOF with coking coal, big blast furnaces, and only about 20%, the rest is made in the electric arc furnaces. So before that, you need to make your iron from your iron ore. And before you can do that, some ores also need to be improved or beneficiated. So I've been practicing that word in front of the mirror for the last couple of weeks. Beneficiation, not the easiest one to say. So that includes removing impurities, increasing the iron content in your ore before you put it in a blast furnace. And agglomeration there is just taking bits of iron ore and sticking them together into larger lumps to aid the process. So Australia has a whole heap of hematite ore that is known as direct shipping ore. So it's minimally processed in Australia. We dig it up, we do some minor crushing and grinding, and then we ship it along with our coking coal to China, where it is processed primarily in blast oxygen furnaces with our coking coal. And this releases a lot of carbon dioxide. So we did some work a few years ago now where we looked at all of our energy-intensive exports from Australia, including LNG, coal, and our ores that we produce. And we did some back-of-the-envelope calculations to show about 11% of the Asia-Pacific region's emissions are due to processing or using commodities that come from Australia. So that is a large amount of emissions that Australia has some ability to help mitigate. In order to do so, we need to really shift our steel processing from this blast oxygen furnaces with coking coal to electric arc furnaces. And that's really tricky. First of all, most of the existing plant is already blast oxygen furnaces. They last for about 50 years. They're really well understood technology. But also, we don't need to just do something about that end of the supply chain. We need to start thinking about all the different steps beforehand and do changes all along the way. And most importantly, our hematite in Australia is not actually suitable for direct processing in electric arc furnaces. We need to start doing some beneficiation of those ores as well. And there's a whole range of new technologies that can be developed, that are being developed, to try and figure out how we can do that competitively. And there's a number of pathways that Australia can take to start decarbonising this supply chain. So first of all, we could just make our mining more decarbonised using green ammonia, using renewable energy, and ship our ore with less embedded emissions. Or we could do a little bit more upgrading, improving beneficiation in country before we ship it off. And therefore shipping iron ore pellets, sorry. Our next option is to actually produce some iron in Australia. So we would be doing some of the conversion from iron ore to iron in shaft furnaces or other technologies, and ship hot briquetted iron instead. And then finally, we could do the whole thing in Australia using our renewable energy resources and actually ship primary steel, green primary steel. And it's really not clear which of these pathways are the best one or the possible one, and that's still under investigation. So the HILT is the Heavy Industry Low Carbon Transition Cooperative Research Centre, working to de-risk the decarbonisation of heavy industry, including iron and steel, but also cement and lime and aluminium and bauxite. So we're looking, we bring together all researchers from academia, partners from government and industry to help really solve all these technical and non-technical issues to unlock this possibility for green metals. This is a very complicated diagram, but it just shows you why we are looking at these three main areas. There's a whole lot of opportunities for circularity, for linking between the different processes that you need to make cement products, aluminium products, and steel products. And HILT is looking at all of these technologies, as well as the provision of the energy that you will need, and the transformative part of it up the top, which is thinking about certification, which the Honourable Josh Wilson mentioned in the Guarantee of Origin schemes, critical to supporting green premiums, and a whole range of other issues that we need to think about as well. So for iron ore and steel, we are looking at technologies and methods for producing products along the supply chain. We're looking at how you actually link variable renewable energy with stationary heavy industry processes, what kind of infrastructure you would need to develop for that, and really are trying to understand how you support markets, drive demand, and allow this industry to flourish. This is just some of the projects that we are looking at in currently our 5-year plan. So we've got various projects in various technology and non-technology related areas. And the key point that I wanted to make here is it's not that this is something that can be solved by one country, one industry, one company, no matter how big they are. What it's going to require is a whole lot of cooperation across the sectors of academia, industry, and government, not only domestically, but also internationally, right? Understanding that these supply chains are very international. So we have over 60 partners, and we're still growing. And I'll just leave that there for now and say thank you very much. I hope I've given you enough for the panel to get into the nitty-gritty and for everyone to come along for the ride. I can, but I don't know if anyone else can. that one.
Fabulous. Well, that FIC 101, thank you, Fiona. You sort of indicate, sorry, a bit of feedback. You indicated that the jury's out in terms of which of those options is looking the most likely. Do you have a view?
There we go. That's okay. I think it's going to be somewhere in the middle. I think that we will likely be doing some processing onshore, but we will be shipping intermediate products rather than doing the full green steel onshore. But as I say, it's really unclear which technology is going to win. That you need to be thinking about different supply chain issues for different ores in different places, and really, there's a lot going on.
To the non-miner, I have to say it's quite mind-boggling how complex it is. We just assumed it was, you dig the stuff up, you run it through a mill, and out the other end it comes. But we are learning. Thank you so much for that fantastic presentation. Please thank Fiona again for us. And I'll now ask our panel to come up to stage, if you would not mind, panellists. We have, in no particular order, Jonathan Grant, Chief Advisor Climate Change at Rio Tinto. Professor Zhang Xiliang, who is from Tsinghua University, is the Director of the Institute for Economy, Energy and Environment. Please sit down, it's fine. Institute for Economy, Energy and Environment in China, and a bio that's longer than your arm, so I won't read it out, but needless to say, he knows a lot about a lot of things and is, I think, highly influential in the discussions about the energy transition in China. Professor Iain MacGill, who will be known to many Australians in the audience at UNSW, which is one of our leading lights in renewable energy education and research in Australia. And Professor Frank Jotzo, Head of Energy at the ANU Institute for Climate, Energy and Disaster Solutions. Please welcome the panel. All right, who's missing a microphone? That's you, Frank. I might have to stand up because it's a bit tight for me up there. So let me put that question that I've just put to Fiona to this panel. Do you have a view on what the likely future looks like in terms of Australia's role in the supply chain? Who would like to take that?
I mean, I'm happy to have a first go at answering that. But let me just talk a bit about what Rio Tinto is doing in looking at transforming the iron ore and steel value chain. To give you an idea of scale, Rio Tinto exports about 1 million tonnes of iron ore a day from Australia. That's about 4 shiploads. Our emissions from the Pilbara mining operations in Western Australia are around 3 million tonnes per year of CO2. So 1 million tonnes of that is associated with power generation. We have natural gas-based power generation that power the operations. And about 2 million tonnes are from the use of diesel in our trucks and trains. So there's work to be done to, switch to renewable power and to develop alternatives to diesel. I think in the interim we're looking at the use of biofuel in our trucks and trains because they're very hard to decarbonise, and we're working to develop technologies with our peers and equipment manufacturers, that ultimately will get to sort of zero emission trucks. So that's at our mines. It's a significant challenge. We're looking at building ultimately, at least 1 gigawatt of renewable electricity in Western Australia over the coming years to support the decarbonisation of our mines. But that's 3 million tonnes. So to ship that ore to China and elsewhere in Asia, the emissions they're over 5 million tonnes of CO2. And then the processing of that ore into steel is around 400 million tonnes of CO2. So the scope 3 emissions associated with that iron ore production are, an order of magnitude different to what they are in the mining operations. I think a particular challenge with the Pilbara ores is that they're not as well suited to the sort of the low carbon steel making production process that we would typically see in Europe, where it's using high grade DRI and the shaft furnace and the electric arc furnace. So we're exploring other pathways. And I think we're still very much at the R&D phase in terms of looking at that technology. So it's too early to say where that technology will end up and who will do it. But generally steel production is done close to the customer rather than exported. So I think that's certainly something that is worth considering.
Can I just clarify then? So the fact that it's lower grade, in Rio's view and possibly in Hilt's view, does not necessarily rule the Pilbara out of a green iron or green steel supply chain.
Absolutely not. I mean, it's we're looking at these three main different pathways. So the first thing we need to do is decarbonise the blast furnace and look at how you can optimise that through beneficiation, through how you manage the lump in the process. We think we can get 20 to 30% reductions from the blast furnace today over the next 10 years or so, just by optimizing the blast furnace. When it comes to Pilbara ores, there are multiple different pathways that we're exploring. So one is our investment in bioiron. Another is a sort of a co-investment with BHP and BlueScope Steel in electric smelting furnaces. So there are pathways for the Pilbara ore, but we need to develop those technologies.
I really don't know if it's me or who, but anyway, let's just say it's me. Can I just clarify, RTIO, Rio Tinto Iron Ore, is the largest exporter or producer of iron ore in the world. That is correct? But you do not really play much of a role in processing now. Do you have plans to play a role in processing, or is your expectation that you'll just work with your customers in order to find a solution for them to use your ores in a decarbonised process?
I mean, I think the first thing that I want to say is that 90% of the world's iron ore is of sort of Australian grade, low to mid-grade iron ore. Only about 10% of the world's iron ore is this high-grade material that can go into the DRI process. So the problem isn't a particular problem with Australian iron ore, and we're going to shift from that. The challenge is, how do you crack the code to decarbonise those lower to mid-grade ores? So that's what we're working on. I think that ultimately we are looking at technologies where we may play a greater role in processing, but we're still very much at the R&D stage with things like bioiron and electric smelting.
Okay, great, thank you. Let's move on to Xiliang. We'd really appreciate your perspective in terms of how China views the role that Australia might play in a decarbonised supply chain. Is it a bigger one? Is it not?
Okay, so I think first I would say, so Australia can make a great contribution to the decarbonization of the global iron and steel sector, and so this is the first the comments so on your questions. So maybe I also take this opportunity to say some words about how China how the iron and steel is so important for China to achieve the carbon neutrality goals, and what's the possible solutions for China to decarbonize the iron and steel sector. So and the iron and steel sector is the sector, is the manufacturing sector with the largest carbon dioxide emissions in China. So accounting for approximately 15% of China's total energy-related emissions. So and also China's iron and steel sector right now is dominated by the blast furnace route. And so that's a problem. That's why China's iron steel sector emit so high amount of CO2 emissions, and also China's fleet of steel plants is pretty young. So I think it's really that's why we believe the iron and steel sector is among the hardest mitigating sector in China. And so of course now we have some solutions, and we're talking maybe for the near term. So it's about the improve the energy efficiency, the fuel substitution, with the mid-term, the CCUS, and the hydrogen-based DRI. And but I think for this kind of work, we very much need the collaboration of China and Australia. But I think there's other options, maybe China, so to export, so not iron, maybe the green steels and the green, pig irons. So I think it's also the option. So in China, there many experts don't believe China needs such a high capacity of steel manufacture. Maybe we can also import. So not rather than import green steel rather than iron ore. So that's a discussion. Of course, I think in terms of the technology development, I think China right now also have some pilots. So on the hydrogen-based DRI products and CCUS demonstration products. So I think in this context, and China, Australia, and also renewable-based hydrogen production projects technology. So in this context, I think China, US neither China and Australia can work together to I think it's together to decarbonize the sector.
Okay, so it sounds to me like there's still a little bit of uncertainty in terms of exactly what the pathways are, but we will begin with certain measures that could be taken, potentially with retaining the Chinese, that rather young steel mill fleet or blast furnaces that you discussed. Do you think there would be an interest in China receiving a partially produced product from Australia? Yes. Okay, great. Fantastic to hear that from you. I guess there's questions of the sort of industrial competitiveness too, and how that changes the equation, and this is one of the things that we'll talk about in a moment. I'm going to come to you, Iain, next. You've been looking at, I guess, green iron / steel trade routes and options into Europe. Can you tell us about your work in that regard?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Anna. Hi, everyone. I should say I'm part of a team actually led by Dr. Raman Dayan, who's unable to be here, a team across University of New South Wales, but particularly in the School of Mineral and Energy Resource Engineering. We were involved in a project called High Supply, which some of you may remember, which was around green hydrogen supply and value chains between Australia and Germany. And we were recently supported by DQ, Department of Climate Change, Energy, Environment and Water, partnering with the Federal Ministry of Education and Research in Germany to run a somewhat similar study looking at green steel pathways as well. And I think, as Fiona highlighted, we're extraordinarily well positioned, I guess, in the current steel industry, or certain parts of it. Don't do much steel production in Australia, but obviously iron ore we haven't really
Iain,
talked
just
about.
move your microphone closer to your mouth. Remember also we have online viewers.
Hi everyone online, sorry about that. We haven't really talked about the metallurgical coal piece of this as well. We're very well placed in terms of what we think are the key inputs into a green steel industry, and that's particularly going to be around renewables, not exclusively. How are we going to go? Well, it's really going to be about the actions that Australia can take, and there's an industry piece and a government piece to that, but also the way that we partner with other regions. So if we think about Europe, the first point is, steel's an internationally traded commodity, of course, as are the inputs. But it also, as I think you might have taken away from Fiona's presentation, it has incredible complexities and specialisations when you actually get to, is that steel going into machine tools or into Rio for construction and so on. And so it's really important to be thinking about supply chains and value chains between Australia and China, but also Europe as well. Europe's the second largest steel producing region in the world. Having said that, it's about a tenth of Asia and about a seventh of China. So Germany's 25% of European steel production. Europe is actually a steel importer. It's also an iron importer already. Most of that's pig iron. It has incredible IP and know-how around specialty steels, so car steels, machine tool steels. And they have obviously a really key role in the way that the steel industry is going to go. There's 60 projects across Europe at the moment exploring different aspects of decarbonisation of the steel industry. And as you'll know, they've also got incredible ambition, Germany and Europe, for industrial decarbonisation and a set of policies in place to push that forward. So, hence our study looking at Australian-German opportunities. I will say, as Fiona highlighted, do we green up basically the same inputs to steel producing, but now also renewable hydrogen and make steel in conventional technologies overseas? Do we make the green steel here in Australia? Or, as seems quite possibly the more appropriate path forward, is doing some of the processing here to hot briquette iron, as Fiona flagged. That picks up a lot of the emissions and a lot of the energy input, but that's then an input into the really specialised steel production, which many countries have so much capability, and Europe certainly, around making those specialised steels.
What is the share of emissions across that iron ore to steel production in terms of where do the emissions sit in converting it to iron and then converting it to steel?
Yeah, look at, again, coming back to Fiona's figures, you don't remember the details, you probably won't, but remember the complexity of it. So when you do this sort of analysis, there's an energy balance piece and an emissions piece, but so much depends on the particular choices around the process. So if you use gas-fueled DRI versus coking coal blast furnaces, significant emission reduction. If you're using recycling scrap in electric arc furnaces, well, where you're getting the electricity from, but generally significant emissions reductions. But very roughly.
Give us the rough estimate, Iain.
Roughly.
Go on, you can do it.
There's most of the energy is in getting from the iron ore to the iron rather than from the iron to the steel.
Approximately?
Depends on the process, Anna. But the emissions is a much more significant. So under sort of standard processes, it might be, and perhaps Jonathan wants to jump in, but you might be thinking around 80% of the emissions are sitting in the conventional process of getting to the iron,
right,
and not in getting to the steel.
Okay, so it would make a massive difference.
Oh, yeah.
If we just did that partial processing. I think, yeah, okay. What is the appetite of Europe for us to do that?
Yeah, so I think the first point is, I don't think it'll surprise many here that the steel industry in Germany and Europe, and they're not the only places, it's under a significant challenge right now. And the decarbonisation piece is an additional challenge on that. I'm never convinced of the language of hard to abate. I think we need to get to the next question, is why? Is it because the technologies don't exist, or is it just the economic case is very hard to make? Is it the nature of the market? And so, very competitive international markets, really strong cost drivers. But I would certainly say, in terms of appetite for green steel, Europe's really in a leadership position. And that's reflected in targets they have, it's reflected in policies that they're implementing, it's reflected in the work they're doing to green up steel across a range of facilities in Europe. So they're one very good partner. I would emphasise that China is another key partner in this.
All right, thank you, Iain. We'll move on to Frank now. I wasn't deliberately moving down the line, but that's kind of just by happenstance how it's happened. Frank, what are the global forces that are likely to mean that we will actually start to see this happen? Because in conversations that I've had with Rio, I will say over time, you know, there's not much of a green premium that customers are willing to pay. We might see some in some areas of applications. I was at Salzgitter, which is, I think, the third largest steel producer in Germany. Might be the fourth, can't remember. Earlier this year, and they were mostly selling them to the automotive sector, so and to the appliance sector. There are thousands and thousands of types of steel that can go into many different applications, and it seems to me that some of those more premium uses, where it's a consumer electronic or whatever, maybe there's some willingness, although I think Jonathan might even question me on that case from the experience on aluminium. But what is going to drive this transformation? Is it, in some places we will see carbon policies or emissions reduction policies? Are there other things going on as well that's likely to mean that we will start to see this change happening more broadly?
Yeah, very, very important points. And look, we're looking at a really huge industry with enormous amount of deployed capital that is largely long-lived capital investments, right? So we're not going to see that shift very quickly. So let's think about 2050s, 2060s, and imagine a world that actually takes climate action very seriously and that gets to net zero around about then. Then we're looking at a largely decarbonized steel industry globally that could take many different shapes. If it happens in an economically efficient way, then we will see the bulk of transformation from iron ore to iron in places where there's abundant, cheap, clean energy, right? And probably in places where there's co-location with iron ore, and that's of course the proposition behind Australia potentially being in a driver's seat for green iron. Will that necessarily happen? Well, we don't know, right? Because there's of course firstly the tendency to keep steel production where it is because of the deeply established connections between suppliers and customers, right? Because of the established human capital, engineering expertise and so forth, and because of a tendency for governments to want to retain established industrial capacity and capability where it is, rather than outsourcing part of it to another part of the world, right? And so we could very well end up in a world where we're doing continuing steel production where it currently is, even though that doesn't make that much sense anymore energetically when we move to zero carbon settings. So how can we get to a more efficient pathway where Australia provides green iron, especially to East Asia, right? Korea already thinking about this, Japan an obvious opportunity, Taiwan likewise, China the big question ultimately, I think, Professor Zhang in particular. Demand side policies are really where we need to get to over time. The bulk of clean commodity policies at this point are supply side policies, right? Making it easier, or more to the point, cheaper to produce green ammonia, to produce green iron, green steel, right? Subsidies, production tax credits, other measures. In markets, right, especially markets where there's heavy trade in commodities, that's ultimately not a sustainable policy basis, right? Because it requires sustained long-term willingness of governments providing taxpayer funds to subsidize commodity production at a very large scale. It's difficult to see that happen as a long-term proposition. So what we need is demand creation for green product. And it needs to be more than just the occasional electric car that has a badge on it saying made with green steel and green aluminium. That will help to get a few million tons per year of demand going. But ultimately what we need is systematic demand creation, and the dominant tool for getting that is carbon pricing. And the dominant tool in future likely to extend that to international producers is border carbon adjustments to extend the domestic price signal to international markets.
And can I ask you about that? Are we seeing other regions of the world respond because Europe and the UK are moving to carbon border adjustments for steel? Are we seeing others say, well, gosh, you know, if I'm going to be charged at the border, I might as well put a carbon price on where I am now? And that starts to make the case more viable in those regions. Oh, is there any movement?
Once again, it's not really a near-term proposition in iron and steel, right? I think we can say we see a preparation for these patterns in green ammonia, for example, where the EU arrangements will provide a clear advantage for exporters of green ammonia into the European Union compared to exporters of conventional grey ammonia. Okay, blue ammonia, same story there. Iron and steel, that's a little bit down the track. But if we think, for example, of the German steel industry, ThyssenKrupp, right, and plans to have a hydrogen-based full steel production chain, iron ore to steel, in the middle of Europe, right, with piped, you know, hydrogen on tankers and then in pipelines, is an extremely expensive proposition, right? And the EU carbon border adjustment mechanism will make it apparent just how much more expensive it is to do it that way compared to importing semi-finished green product like green iron.
Okay, I've got one last question for the panel before I'm going to invite a few audience questions. We might go a couple of minutes over, but I think that will be okay. The last question I'll put to the panel, please, we have time for 1 minute or 30-second answers. How does Australia make itself compelling as playing a larger role within the supply chains? What is required for us to actually do that? What are the ingredients? What must we get right? Jonathan, have you got a view?
Yes, and I just want to reiterate what Frank said, because I agree with your points around what will make Australia competitive in this area. So energy pricing has been the primary source of relative competitive advantage, you know, in the metals industry more generally. And so I think, you know, historically in Australia that's been based on low priced coal and natural gas, the abundant availability of that. So as Australia is looking to transition, you know, we need policy that supports the infrastructure development in renewables in that country. And alongside that, you know, in the iron and steel sector, we need different sorts of policies for R&D, for first-of-a-kind projects, and then ultimately for deployment. So you need sort of tax incentives for R&D. You need government support and commercial support for these pilot projects. You know, that might be some niche buyers. We have that with aluminium, our aluminium smelting technology in Canada, where we have a collaboration with Apple, who buys our zero carbon aluminium smelting material there. But ultimately we'll need higher carbon prices. But that needs to apply to blast furnaces around the world to really drive down those emissions.
Thank you, Jonathan. Xiliang.
So I believe Australia absolutely have strength. So in terms of providing the green steel, so I think so it's very important for Australia to achieve the potential. There is a global trade environment, so and not like the current renewable energy situation. So there are too much trade restrictions on the renewable commodities. So I think it's not the good. I think there is an intention of too much, so an expansion of the security domain. So I think it's a big problem. But it's actually happened for the global renewable supply chain. But I hope it will be no longer happens for the green steel. Such that I think Australia can make a larger contribution, of course.
I don't think we've followed down the pathway of the US yet or have any intention of doing so, Xiliang, from what I see. But anyway, Iain.
Yeah, and making Australia compelling. Look, everything that's been said, and renewables costs and building up renewables industry in parallel is so critical here. And that's going to need high levels of coordination because it needs high levels of renewables, and that takes time.
What about hydrogen, Iain? How important is that to the success of this story? Does it matter?
Look, I think there's ongoing technology progress and so on, including direct electrification approaches that we're seeing. And there's obviously opportunities around electric arc furnaces powered by renewables, but in terms of virgin iron ore to iron production, hydrogen looks to be key. So low-cost hydrogen is going to be a big part of this. But I'd make one more point about what makes Australia compelling. In one way, it's not going to be a single thing. It's actually a coherence across the way industry is being supported, the way that Australia's working with others. So you've actually got to get a lot of things right, and rather than just trying to win on one thing being done really well.
Yep, I thoroughly agree. Frank, over to you.
Australia is really compelling, right? We have the natural advantage and we have the experience and reputation as a reliable resource provider and processor, right? The problem is cost, right? And so I can share with you key results from a forthcoming paper, large expert elicitation on green iron and steel. And, you know, the things that stand out, firstly, are the requirement for cheap energy in very large amounts in order to produce the hydrogen, okay? That's number one. And the second one is the high cost of capital and generally the high cost of doing business in Australia's remote areas like the Pilbara region, for example, right? And that needs to be addressed, that needs to be supported through, for example, infrastructure development, right? But also through regulatory declogging, right? So what we're hearing from industry is that it's not necessarily as easy to get something going in Australia as it is perhaps in the Gulf states, right? There you've got a competitive disadvantage right there. And we need skilled workforce, right? So we need to open up the immigration program, for example, to get the hordes of engineers into the country that we will need for that. All of these kinds of things, and I would put those types of things ahead of spending billions of dollars in production tax credits.
And strong investment in our university and research sectors, wouldn't you say, Frank?
Oh, funny that you should mention it.
So we have time quickly for a couple of last questions. Yes. Have we got mics? Oh, Jonathan, sorry, no, we won't steal yours. We'll steal Xiliang's. Could you please introduce yourself as you ask your question?
Hi everyone, I'm Vishal from WWF India, and we are also working on a decarbonization of steel sector program in India and creating a coalition around gathering the industry, starting a dialogue. So we talked about the beneficiation process and how the carbon pricing can play a role. But we haven't touched upon the green hydrogen part of it. Do you think it playing a role, and at what price point or in how many years do you foreseeing, because we will need that for the beneficiation process, how it will play a role in coming years?
I mean, it is one of the technologies that we're looking at. It aligns well with the existing natural gas and DRI production route. So if you can switch some of that gas to hydrogen, then you can lower the carbon intensity of the production. So it is definitely one of the technologies that the steel sector is pursuing. I'm not sure the extent to which it works with Pilbara ore, but it's certainly something that we're looking at with the DRI grade ores that we produce in Canada.
Basically, I wanted to understand at what price point do you think it will start impacting the demand side? That the green steel demand will pick up at what price point do you think?
We're still at the R&D stage with some of these technologies, so I think it's too early to really talk about price points for hydrogen or the ultimate product that we're talking about, green iron or green steel.
One last question. Any others? Yes. just right next door.
Sorry, this is also for Jonathan. Yeah, you mentioned...
Could you just introduce yourself?
Oh, sorry, Maddie. I'm from Monash University. You mentioned that decarbonisation of the pulp mines is in the R&D stage. Are there hard targets, or is there anything more than just the R&D at the moment?
We're working on it.
Hard targets in relation to what?
Decarbonisation of the mining operations.
Oh yes, I mean we're looking to reduce our scope 1 and 2, so our operational emissions, by 50% by 2030 relative to 2018 levels. So we've got ambitious targets to decarbonise our own operations. Most of our emissions are from processing rather than mining. So 80% of our emissions are processing. A lot of that is from the aluminium value chain, so bauxite to alumina to aluminium smelting, which is very carbon and electro-intense.
Can Phil see me? Yes, I'm here. Folks, that is all we have time for. Thank you so much. That was a fascinating panel, I thought, if I can say that myself. But that was really interesting, and thank you so much for, I think, giving us a really great overview of where it's at. I think probably some of us in the audience might be feeling a little bit frustrated it can't move a lot faster. But I think that's important. That's part of the reason why it's so important that we're focused so heavily on it now, is because we can see how long it will take to make these changes, and we need to be extremely urgent and focused on the actions that we take now, because it's going to take quite some time for those to take effect. So please thank our panel, and thank you so much for joining us.